The clink of polished cutlery rang out in the garden courtyard, where laughter came easy for those who never knew loss. Liam leaned back in his chair, a smirk curling beneath designer sunglasses, one arm lazily draped over the backrest as he gestured toward an elderly woman tending to the roses just beyond the patio. "Look at her," he said, loudly glancing at his date. A relic from the days when people lived on these estates instead of just serving food in them. His date laughed softly, unsure, but the damage was done. The woman in the garden paused. She didn't look up. She didn't say a word, but her fingers stained with soil, and time trembled for only a moment before returning to the petals. Liam never saw a face clearly. He didn't need to, because years from now her silence would become the very thing that dismantled everything he built. And when he finally learned who she truly was, the truth would not only shame him, it would change everything he believed about power. The estate had been renovated into an exclusive farm-to-table restaurant nestled at the edge of the countryside, where tech millionaires escaped the chaos of the city to play pretend at simplicity. Liam wore the look-well linen blazer over a crisp white tee, a Mont Blanc pen clipped just visibly enough into the pocket to seem accidental. The woman across from him, Ava, was 27, and soft-spoken, clearly impressed. Liam liked that. He didn't want conversation, just admiration. A server brought over wine, a vintage Liam had loudly insisted on. As they toasted, his gaze drifted past the trellised vines and curated herb beds to the far side of the garden. There, kneeling in front of a rosebush, was a woman in a wide straw hat. Her back was hunched, and her sleeves were rolled up past papery elbows. Dirt clung to her fingers. And just like that, Liam couldn't resist. "Crazy how they kept some of the help from the old days, huh?" he said, half joking. "What is she, 90? Must have come with the bricks." Ava let out a nervous laugh. "Liam," the gardener looked up briefly. No expression, just eyes steady and dark and still. Liam missed the glance entirely. He was already on his phone scrolling through messages about his upcoming Series B pitch. Anyway, he said, swiping, "I'm meeting some guys next week about a potential buyout. Should be a formality, everyone wants in." Ava tried to follow the shift in tone, but her eyes kept drifting back to the woman in the garden. There was something about her posture, the way she moved, not just old, but practiced, like every rose had known her hands for years. "Do you think she's worked here a long time?" Ava asked. Liam waved dismissively. "Places like this love to keep one mascot around to make it seem authentic. Trust me, it's branding." Isabel heard it all. She always did. She had been part of this soil longer than the current walls. Later that evening, when the guests had left and the courtyard was empty, she returned to the bush Liam had laughed at. A single petal had been crushed into the gravel where his loafer had stepped during his mockery. She plucked it gently and closed her eyes. Once, decades ago, she had stood in this very spot in a silk dress, waiting for her husband to come home from yet another gambling trip. Back then, this garden had been hers. Her name was carved into the stone just beneath the sundial, though it had long since been grown over with moss. But the house had vanished from her hands the way dusk fades to night, gradually, then completely. Her husband Julian had been charismatic, risky, and just successful enough to be dangerous. When the final debt collector came, Isabel had watched their things get loaded into trucks. What she didn't expect was the buyer, an old friend of Julian's, offering her an option. "You can stay on," he had said, not cruelly. "The estate needs tending, and you seem the type to keep its roots alive." She was 42. Her pride had withered. She chose to stay. That was nearly 30 years ago. The original buyer passed away not long after, but the next owners, young investors who saw charm in retaining the legacy staff, had found her impossible to displace. She worked quietly, paid rent on a modest cottage on the grounds, and never once mentioned who she had once been. Until one day she didn't need to. Across town, Liam sat in his penthouse overlooking the river. He was on a call with his co-founder, Brad, pacing barefoot across cold marble. "The Singapore fund is stalling," Brad said through static. "They want more transparency on our burn rate." "They'll get it," Liam said sharply. "This is just noise. I have backup options." Brad hesitated. "You sure you want to push this hard?" What about the local investor we met at the estate dinner last month? The silent one. Not responding, Liam muttered. Probably some old money dinosaur. If they won't move, we'll find someone who will. He ended the call and sighed, pouring another drink. There was no doubt in his mind. He always landed on his feet. The next week, Isabel met with Martin, the restaurant's operations manager, under the shade of the sycamore tree. She's coming to inspect the books, he whispered. Silent partners stepping forward. Isabel nodded. Will you be there? Martin asked gently. I always am, she said, and went back to trimming the hedge. He watched her work for a moment, before walking away, the weight of her silence wrapping the air in reverence. Years ago, he had discovered the truth when he stumbled upon a leather-bound ledger tucked into the back of the estate library. Inside were names, dates, and the original deed to the estate, signed in Isabel's hand. He never told anyone. He didn't need to. But from then on, whenever she asked for a change in the garden or a new seed budget, he approved it without a word. She had earned the right to rebuild in peace. The next time Liam returned, he was alone. A client lunch. He didn't even glance toward the garden. But Isabel saw him. She stood behind the kitchen window, wiping her hands on an old cloth. Ava never came back after that first date. Something in her had sensed what Liam couldn't, that what he had mocked wasn't just a gardener. It was someone who had chosen grace in the face of ruin, and who soon would hold the power to make or break him. The estate's library remained locked to the public, though few guests noticed or cared. Hidden behind the old wine cellar, its key sat in Martin's desk drawer, a key only two people ever used, Martin himself and Isabel. On rainy afternoons, Isabel would sometimes drift through its dusty aisles, fingers tracing cracked spines and old penciled annotations. The room smelled of wood polish and time, and if she closed her eyes, she could almost hear Julian laughing from the hall beyond before the debts and the lies. The books hadn't changed, but she had. It was in this room that she first discovered her own resilience. Long before she bought her first stock, before she joined her first investment club under a false last name, before she learned to read balance sheets with the same care she once gave the dahlias. She had never been a victim. She just needed the world to forget her long enough for her to start again. That rainy Thursday, Martin knocked softly on the library door before entering. He's back, he said. Isabel didn't look up from the ledger she was inspecting. Liam. Martin nodded. He's hosting a private lunch with potential investors. Same startup, different haircut. She closed the book. The kitchen staff. Informed. No one's to mention anything. Good. She stood slowly, knees aching a bit more than they had last year. She walked to the window and gazed out. Raindrops made the garden blur like a watercolor. In the distance, Liam's navy blue Porsche gleamed against the gravel. I doubt he remembers me, she said. Martin hesitated. Do you want him to? She didn't answer. Liam, meanwhile, was rehearsing his pitch to three suited men seated under the garden pergola, their umbrellas perched awkwardly above them, like mismatched wings. Our customer retention is above 88%, he was saying, voice crisp, confident. We've streamlined user onboarding through AI-driven automation, and one of the men, a serious-looking investor named Chen, raised a hand. Your revenue burn is accelerating. How do you plan to offset that if your Series B stalls? Liam's jaw twitched. We're in late-stage talks with a silent capital partner, he said, eyes steady. They've expressed strong intent. Chen exchanged glances with his colleague. And the name. They prefer discretion, Liam said. Another pause. The wind shifted. Chen tapped his notepad. You're referring to the woman who was at the estate dinner last month, the one who owns the controlling interest here. Liam blinked. She's involved here. Chen raised a brow. You didn't know she's one of the key investors who helped relaunch this property after the last ownership collapse. Liam said nothing. That evening, Liam wandered back into the courtyard long after his guests had left. The deal hadn't closed. There had been too many questions, too many pauses. He needed leverage. He found Martin inside polishing glasses. Can I talk to the owner? Liam asked casually. Martin looked up. She doesn't take walk-ins. Tell her it's urgent. I'm working on a significant partnership that could benefit the estate too. Martin dried the rim of a glass slowly, then placed it down. She's not here. Liam glanced around. Where does she live? Martin didn't answer. Try again tomorrow. There was something strange about Martin's eyes, a flicker of restrained amusement, a knowingness. Liam didn't like it. Back at her cottage near the eastern tree line, Isabel was reviewing quarterly reports. Her investment group had voted to pull from Liam's startup unanimously. She had not spoken. She didn't need to. The numbers were reason enough, but Martin had slipped her a note with the withdrawal notice he's asking for you. Isabel folded the paper, set it aside. Then she stood, walked into her garden, and resumed trimming her roses. Flashback, 1991. Julian had been gone for 3 nights, and Isabel waited in the drawing room, hands clasped tightly around her tea. He returned smelling like whiskey and sweat, tossing his coat onto a chair. "We're selling," he said flatly. She blinked. "Selling what?" He didn't answer. Isabel stood slowly. "You told me we were clear. I was wrong." She took a breath. "So what now?" "We leave." He didn't look at her. "He says you can stay, if you work. Gardening or something." Her face flushed. "You mean as staff?" Julian shrugged. "It's better than nothing." She didn't argue. She just nodded, walked to the window and stared at the roses. Present. Liam lay awake that night in his penthouse, scrolling through every article he could find on the estate's ownership. There was almost nothing, just vague mentions of long-term heritage partnership and a legacy preservation fund. But one image caught his eye, a photo low-res from an event years ago, a garden restoration fundraiser. And there in the corner, barely noticeable, stood the gardener. Same hat, same stance, same hands. He zoomed in, heart thudding. Could it be? His mind reeled back to the moment he mocked her, the way she'd paused still but alert. He felt suddenly nauseous. The next day he returned, early, alone, this time no Porsche. He wore jeans and a black hoodie. He found her near the pergola, pruning shears in one hand, gloves in the other. He approached quietly. "Excuse me," he said. She turned slowly, looked at him. Close now he could see her face, creased but elegant, eyes sharp as glass. "I believe we've met," he said. She nodded once. "We have?" He hesitated. "I didn't know who you were." "I know," she said, and returned to her roses. He stood awkwardly. "You're one of the investors, aren't you?" "I was." "What does that mean?" She clipped a deadhead bloom, then looked at him. I withdrew. His stomach dropped. "But the deal?" "You insulted me," she said, voice calm. "Not with your words, with your certainty." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She continued. "I was once given a choice. To stay. To serve. I accepted it, not because I was weak, but because I had plans. Quiet plans." He blinked, unsure what to say. Then she said softly, "You've mistaken visibility for power." She turned, walked past him, and left him standing among the roses. Liam didn't move. He stood in the garden, rooted like the rose's eyes fixed on the path where she'd walked away. The weight of her words clung to him heavier than any deal gone wrong. "You've mistaken visibility for power." It echoed in his chest, long after the breeze had stilled. He turned slowly and sat on the nearest bench, the wood damp from morning dew. He hadn't come to apologize. Not really. He'd come to recover a deal, reclaim control. But now, sitting alone among the trimmed hedges and turned soil, something else began to take root. Regret. Later that day, Isabel sat in the estate office reviewing documents for the upcoming ownership transition. She no longer had financial ties to the restaurant, but Martin insisted she stay on through the summer to help train the new ground staff. She agreed not for them, but for the garden. The roses had survived storms, frost, and betrayal. So had she. A knock interrupted her. Martin stepped in, holding a small box. "He left this," he said. "Didn't say much. Just asked me to give it to you." Isabel eyed the box. "What is it?" "Didn't look. Thought you might want to decide if it deserves opening." She waited until Martin left, then opened it. Inside, a single rose petal, dried and pressed into a note card. On the card, scribbled in neat, unfamiliar handwriting I see now, "And I'm sorry." Isabel stared at the words for a long time, then quietly placed the card back in the box and closed it. Meanwhile, Liam was unraveling. That evening he met with Brad, his co-founder, in a glass-walled co-working space overlooking the freeway. "She pulled out," Liam said flatly. Brad froze mid-sip. What do you mean, pulled out? She was one of the silent partners we'd flagged. She's out. Gone. Brad set down his coffee. Do you know why? I said something. Months ago. I mocked her. Brad frowned. Who is she? Liam exhaled. She used to own the estate. Brad blinked. Wait, the gardener. Yeah. Jesus. Silence stretched between them. Brad rubbed his temples. Okay. Okay, we can salvage this. We still have a shot if we secure backing from Ventura Equity. They've been circling, Liam muttered. But we're not as shiny anymore. Brad hesitated. You want me to try talking to her? Liam shook his head. She won't take meetings. Not with us. There was a long pause before Brad asked, Do you regret it? Liam didn't answer. Across the estate, the season was shifting. Summer was coming late that year. The roses were blooming a second time. Isabel moved quietly through the greenhouse, checking seed trays, adjusting soil, whispering encouragement to the sprouts. She had always believed in things that took time to grow. Martin arrived with a folder tucked under his arm. Ventura Equity is reaching out, he said. I know, she replied without looking up. They want a legacy partner to stay on board. The staff want you to consider it. So do I. Isabel gently misted a tray of basil. I stayed once, she said, for the sake of survival. And now, Martin asked. She looked up, her eyes steady. Now I stay if it feeds me. Martin gave a soft smile. This place does need a heart, not just hands. She stood and walked to the window, watching a couple stroll across the lawn. Not wealthy, just curious. They took photos near the sundial, laughing softly. This was always meant to be shared, she said quietly. Elsewhere, a quiet subplot unfolded. Carmen, one of the junior kitchen staff, had noticed Isabel's quiet dignity for years. She'd grown up nearby. Father was a handyman, mother worked in housekeeping. Every morning, Carmen passed Isabel in the courtyard. Most days, she just nodded. But this week, something pulled at her. One afternoon, she approached Isabel while she was tending herbs. Ms. Isabel. Isabel looked up. Carmen held out a small envelope. I've been working on a proposal, a side project. Thought maybe you could take a look. Isabel took the envelope. A proposal for expanding the herb garden, to supply more to the kitchen, but also for education programs. Kids from local schools could come, learn, grow things. Isabel smiled gently. Why me? Because people listen to you, Carmen said softly, even when they pretend not to. Isabel held the envelope for a moment. Come by tomorrow, she said. We'll walk the grounds together. Carmen's face lit up like spring. Back in the city, Liam sat in his apartment staring out at the skyline. His inbox was full of emails from investors who had reassessed. Deadlines loomed. Legal teams buzzed. And all he could think of was her face. The way she hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded anything, just walked away. He opened a blank email draft, began typing. Ms. Isabel. Deleted it. Started again. I understand if you don't want to hear from me. Deleted it. Stared at the screen. What could he say that hadn't already been answered by silence? A week passed, then another. Isabel stood near the sundial, watching Carmen lead a small group of children through the herb beds. They laughed and asked questions. Carmen beamed with pride. Martin joined her. She's good, Isabel said. She reminds me of someone. Who? Martin smiled. You, a long time ago. Isabel chuckled softly. That's generous. No, it's just true. They stood in silence for a while, listening to the wind shift the leaves. Then Martin asked, Do you regret it? Staying. Isabel turned to him, her expression unreadable. No, she said. I regret the silence. The years I mistook invisibility for safety. Martin nodded slowly. And now? She looked toward the children. Now I choose when I'm silent. Far from the garden, Liam sat across from a new investor, someone colder, more transactional. They signed a smaller deal. Less equity, more strings. He'd salvaged the company. But something had shifted. He left the meeting, stepped into the late afternoon sun, and pulled out his phone. No new messages, no updates from the estate. And he knew there would be none. She'd said all she needed to. The estate was quiet in the early morning, the kind of stillness that feels like it's listening. Isabel stood at the edge of the property hands, tucked behind her back. Before her, a group of volunteers unloaded crates of young plants. Carmen waved to her from under her sun hat, already deep in instructions. The herb garden expansion had taken off faster than anyone expected. The board had approved Carmen's pilot program, and interest from local schools had grown weekly. Teachers called it a place for children to touch patients. Isabel liked that. She didn't take credit, but she did walk with Carmen most mornings, asking questions, listening, offering quiet suggestions. She had been invisible for so long, but invisibility had taught her how to see. Elsewhere, Liam sat in a grey conference room with his legal counsel, his jaw locked as a mediator read terms aloud. His new investor, a brash venture firm out of New York, was carving through his company with surgical precision reshuffling management, placing oversight on every major decision and demanding aggressive growth plans. Liam had once walked into boardrooms with swagger. Now he walked in like a man carrying something heavy. After the meeting, Brad approached him by the elevators. "They want me to take on more operational control," Brad said carefully. "They don't trust your pivot strategy." Liam stared at the elevator numbers. "I know. We can still build something good," Brad said. "Just not what we pictured." Liam gave a tight nod, and for the first time he didn't fight. At the estate, Martin received an email. He read it 3 times, then walked to Isabel's cottage with it in hand. She was making tea, the scent of chamomile steeping in the air. "You have a message," he said, offering his phone. Isabel wiped her hands and took it. On the screen, "Dear Miss Isabel, I understand if silence is what you prefer, but I wanted to thank you for something I didn't understand then. The garden you've kept. The dignity you never let anyone take from you. It's shaped more than a restaurant. It shaped me, even if I don't deserve to say it. Thank you." "Liam?" She read it once, then again. Martin waited. "What do you want to do?" Isabel returned the phone. "Nothing." Martin tilted his head. No reply. She smiled faintly. He wrote it for himself. That's enough. In the city, Liam stood on the rooftop of his apartment building, watching traffic snake along the freeway below. The sound of the city was distant, like water on stone. He pulled a small envelope from his jacket, a copy of the letter he'd sent. He didn't expect a response, but he'd written it anyway. He folded the letter, tucked it in the back of his notebook, and sat down on the concrete ledge. Behind him, the company rolled on. Investors watched. Deadlines loomed. The future pressed forward. But inside him, something had changed. Not because he was forgiven, because he'd finally seen her. Back at the estate, Carmen's project flourished. Children came in small, wide-eyed groups, learning to plant thyme and lavender, digging hands into cool soil. One boy, after picking his first mint leaf, looked up and said, "It smells like my grandma's house." Isabel smiled. Sometimes the smallest things rooted deepest. The sundial in the center of the garden had been polished recently. Carmen asked Isabel if she wanted to restore the engraving underneath. Isabel thought long about that. "No," she said at last. "Let it stay beneath the moss. It's doing just fine down there." Then one afternoon, Martin called Isabel to the front gate. There was a package, no return address, inside a photo, laminated, old and grainy. It was a black and white snapshot from the 1980s. Isabel in a long dress, smiling beside Julian near the garden gate, and behind them, standing slightly to the left, was a young boy. Liam, no more than 5, wide-eyed, holding a small toy car. She hadn't recognized him before. Not really. But now it came back. Julian had brought guests occasionally. Business acquaintances, friends, their children. One boy had wandered off into the roses, curious, until Isabel found him and guided him back. She'd knelt, offered him a petal, and told him roses had their own kind of memory. He'd said, "I want to live here." She remembered smiling. "Then be kind to the garden." Back in the present, Isabel placed the photo gently on the mantel. She said nothing to anyone. But that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hedgerow, she walked out into the garden barefoot, as she used to when she was young. The grass was cool beneath her feet. The breeze carried the scent of lemon balm and turned pages of memory inside her chest. She paused beside the sundial and looked down. She whispered to the garden not words but a feeling. It answered as always with silence, and she knew everything she needed had stayed. Liam never returned. But sometimes he dreamed of the roses, of her hands, of the silence that said everything he could never take back. And in that dream she always turned to look at him, not with judgment, just knowing. Autumn arrived with quiet gold. Leaves drifted lazily over the cobbled paths of the estate, and the herb beds grew sleepy under early morning frost. Isabel walked with a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders, stopping occasionally to lift a stray leaf from the lavender rose. The season always made her reflective. It was a kind of shedding. She thought not just of trees, but of selves. She'd shed many over the years: a wife, a hostess, a nameplate on a wrought iron gate, and finally, a gardener, the only role that had ever truly rooted her. And now even that title seemed to stretch beyond its borders. Carmen met her near the greenhouse steps. "Field trip's coming next week," she said breathlessly. 42 kids, Isabel chuckled softly. "You'd better grow more mint. They're bringing parents this time. A few from the city." Isabel nodded. "Let them walk the garden. Let them touch something real." Carmen looked at her for a moment, then asked the question she'd been holding. "Do you miss it? The power, I mean." Isabel tilted her head, thoughtful. "I miss being able to fix things quickly," she said. "Money gives speed, but it doesn't give peace." Then she glanced at Carmen with a warm smile. "And I don't miss speed." Elsewhere in a downtown office building, Liam watched numbers slide across a digital dashboard. User acquisition had risen again, barely. He'd met revenue targets last quarter. His team was growing. And yet, Brad walked in, setting a takeaway coffee on Liam's desk. "You still thinking about her?" Liam didn't look up. "Sometimes." Brad leaned against the desk. "You ever going to go back?" Liam shook his head. "She doesn't want that. And I don't need it anymore." There was silence, except for the hum of a nearby printer. "I still think it's wild," Brad said. "You mocked the woman who ended up owning your deal." Liam gave a short laugh. "She didn't end anything. She just chose not to save me." Brad shrugged. "Same difference." Liam turned in his chair, looking out the window toward the blur of city lights. He pulled a notebook from the drawer, the same one where he'd kept the letter. "I used to think silence meant I'd won," he said quietly. "Now I think it's the only real answer you get when you're lucky enough to be told no with grace." At the estate, a closing celebration marked Isabel's final season in full-time work. Carmen would take over all garden programming, while Martin stepped down from operations to consult part-time. The small staff gathered in the courtyard, lights strung through the trees. A few neighbors came. Some former owners, too, those who had once leased the land and always wondered how the gardener knew so much about its history. No speeches were given. Isabel didn't want them. But Carmen handed her a small gift, a handmade book filled with dried herbs from the children's garden, each labeled in careful handwriting. "From your real legacy," she said with a teary smile. Isabel turned the pages, slowly brushing her fingers over the mint-time sage. She looked up at Carmen. "You've made this place yours. Don't forget the quiet things." "I won't," Carmen said. "You taught me they grow deepest." The next morning, Isabel walked the estate one last time before winter preparation began. Frost clung to the grass in silver streaks. Birds sang soft goodbyes in the hedgerows. She paused at the sundial and bent down slowly, brushing her hand over the moss. With her fingernail, she scraped just enough to reveal one letter beneath. She smiled and stood. "Let the rest stay buried, not erased, just returned to the earth." In the city, Liam passed a community garden while walking home. Children were huddled over planter beds, their teacher explaining something about pollination. He paused for a moment, watching. One of the kids looked up at him and grinned before going back to digging. He kept walking. But the scent of basil and turned soil stayed with him. That night, he opened his notebook again and pulled out the photo of the estate. He turned it over. On the back, he wrote, "I learned too late, but not never." Then he tucked it between the pages and left it there, not to forget, but to carry. Weeks later, Isabel sat on her cottage porch, knitting with slow fingers, tea beside her. Snow flirted with the edges of the horizon. Everything was quieter now, but she liked it. Some evenings she walked the garden paths after dark lantern in hand, listening to the hum of sleeping leaves. Sometimes in the soft rustling of branches, she imagined the echoes of lives past hers. Julian's the boy with the toy car. She never needed them to return, only to have passed through. And in those moments, she smiled, because not every story needs a final word. Some just need peace. Have you ever been underestimated only to rise quietly in your own time? Isabel's story isn't about revenge. It's about choosing dignity even when no one's watching. Sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's the deepest kind of power. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts below. What's something in your past you reclaimed in your own quiet way? If you'd like more stories like this about quiet strength, unexpected turns, and what it really means to grow, be sure to subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for staying with us. See you in the next one.